our story begins somewhere far more distant. It begins among the stars, in the vast and silent cosmos, beyond the knowledge of mortals. There exist beings known as the outer gods. These entities are not gods in the way most people imagine them. They do not walk among people, nor do they build kingdoms or raise armies of their own. Instead, they exist at the edge of reality, itself distant, unknowable, and immensely powerful. Their true nature is impossible to fully understand. But what we do know is that many of them desire influence. They seek to shape worlds, guide civilizations, and impose their own vision of reality. Among these cosmic beings, one in particular turned its attention toward a small and mysterious land, a place that would one day be known as the Lands Between. This entity was called the Greater Will. The Greater Will did not descend personally into the world. Instead, like many outer gods, it acted through agents, through vessels, through messengers that could carry its will across the stars. And so, from the depths of the cosmos, the Greater Will sent something toward the world. A golden star. That star streaked across the heavens and fell into the lands between, carrying within it a living creature, a strange divine being, the Elden Beast. This being was not simply a monster or a godly servant. It was something far more fundamental. The Elden Beast was a vassal of the Greater Will. In ancient terms, a vassal is one who holds land and power on behalf of a higher lord. And that is precisely what the Elden Beast became. It arrived in the lands between to establish the will of its distant master, to create order in a world that had once existed without it. But the Elden Beast did not rule through armies or through conquest alone. Instead, it became something greater. It became the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring is not a physical ring like a crown or a piece of jewelry. It is something far more abstract, far more powerful. It is a collection of great runes. Each rune is a fragment of power that defines a law of reality itself. Together, these runes form a system, a structure, a logic that governs how the world behaves. In essence, the Elden Ring is the very concept of order. It defines how life, death, causality, and existence itself are meant to function. Scholars within the lands between would eventually spend centuries studying this mysterious system of laws. Those who devoted themselves to understanding it became known as the Golden Order fundamentalists, and through their study, two of the most important laws of the Elden Ring were revealed. The first is the law of causality. This law explains that every action produces a reaction. Every event creates consequences. And those consequences in turn create new events. Cause leads to effect. Effect becomes a new cause. And so, the chain continues, endlessly branching outward through time. It is the law that binds all events together. The second law is the law of regression. This law states that all things eternally yearn to return to their origins, no matter how far something may travel, no matter how much it may change. Everything ultimately seeks to return to its beginning, to converge, to become whole again. Together, these two laws shape the philosophical foundation of the Golden Order. One law drives the world forward through consequence and action. The other draws all things back toward unity and origin. And at the heart of this system stood a tree, the Erdtree, towering impossibly high above the lands between. Its golden branches could be seen from nearly every corner of the world. Its roots stretched deep into the earth. Its light bathed the land in a soft golden glow. For many people living under its branches, the Erdtree became a symbol of blessing, of divine protection, of stability in a chaotic world. But there is something deeply strange about the Erdtree, something that most people within the lands between never realized. Because the truth is, life in the lands between did not begin with the Erdtree. In fact, life existed long before the Greater will ever arrived, before the Elden Beast, before the Elden Ring, before the Golden Order. There were other civilizations, other powers, and perhaps even other gods that ruled this land. And most importantly, there was another tree, long before the Erdtree rose into the sky. The lands between were home to an ancient and mysterious force known as the Crucible of Life. This crucible was a primordial state where all living things were once blended together. In that distant age, life had not yet separated into the countless forms we recognize today. Beasts, humans, creatures of every kind, all shared the same tangled origin, and this power was tied to a massive ancient tree, a tree sometimes referred to as the Great Tree. This great tree likely stood at the center of the primordial crucible. It was a source of raw, untamed life energy, wild, chaotic, unrefined, and when the Greater Will arrived, it did something extraordinary. It did not simply create a new world from nothing. Instead, it took what was already there and reshaped it. Many scholars believe that the Erdtree may not have been an entirely new creation. Rather, it may have grown around the ancient Great Tree, like a parasite taking hold of an older host. If this theory is true, then the Golden Order did not replace the old world. It consumed it. It absorbed the ancient crucible and reshaped its power into something far more structured, far more controlled. This would explain something very curious about the Erdtree. In ancient times, signs of the crucible were considered divine. Certain warriors possessed strange physical traits: horns, tails, wings, remnants of the time when all life was blended together. These features were once revered. They were seen as sacred marks of the primordial world. But under the Golden Order, these same traits became signs of impurity. Creatures who displayed them were feared, shunned, and cast aside. The omen, born with twisted horns, the misbegotten, with their beast-like forms, and the legendary Crucible Knights, warriors who wielded the ancient powers of the primordial tree. All of them became outsiders, imprisoned, enslaved, or hidden away from the shining capital of the Erdtree, because the Golden Order did not wish to remember what came before it. The past was inconvenient. It reminded people that the Erdtree was not the true beginning of the world, but regardless of its origins, the Erdtree eventually became the dominant force within the lands between. Through countless wars and countless victories, its influence spread across the land. As one ancient incantation states, in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but eventually, the Erdtree became the embodiment of order itself. Yet even with the Elden Ring, even with the Erdtree towering above the world, the Greater Will still required something more, because the Greater Will was distant, far beyond the stars. It needed agents within the world to interpret its will, messengers who could communicate its intentions to those who lived under the Erdtree. And so it sent the two fingers, strange, mysterious beings that served as envoys of the Greater Will. At first glance, the two fingers appear almost absurd. Gigantic, pale fingers, twisting and writhing slowly in the air. They do not speak in words. They do not write messages. Instead, they communicate through subtle movements, through gestures that only a few gifted individuals can understand. These interpreters are known as finger readers, ancient women who dedicate their lives to deciphering the silent language of the fingers. Through them, the will of the Greater Will was translated into guidance for the world. And with this guidance, the Golden Order would soon rise to its greatest power, because the Greater Will had chosen someone very special, someone who would become the vessel of the Elden Ring itself, a queen, a god, a being whose name would echo through the history of the lands between. Queen Marika the Eternal, and her story would change the fate of the entire world. Among all those who lived beneath the growing light of the Erdtree, one figure would rise above the rest. Her name was Marika. History remembers her as Marika the Eternal, the divine queen who ruled the lands between during the height of the Golden Order. But her story did not begin with a crown. In truth, very little is known about her early life. The few clues we have suggest that Marika belonged to a race known as the Numen. The Numen are mysterious, even by the standards of the lands between. They are said to be long-lived, rarely born, and not originally native to the world they inhabit. Some ancient texts even suggest that the Numen came from another world entirely, perhaps another land, perhaps another realm, or perhaps another star. Whatever their true origin may be, Marika eventually came to the attention of the envoys of the Greater Will, and at some point in her life, she was chosen for a role greater than any mortal could imagine. She was named an Empyrean within the theology of the Golden Order, An Empyrean is a being selected as a candidate for godhood. The two fingers themselves identify these individuals as possible successors to divine power, but becoming an Empyrean is not simply a title. It comes with a companion, a protector, a creature known as a shadow. Every Empyrean is granted one. These shadows take the form of powerful beasts, often wolf-like in nature. They are bound to their Empyrean by the will of the two fingers. Their purpose is simple: to serve, to protect, and above all else, to remain loyal. Absolute loyalty is written into their very nature. A shadow cannot betray its Empyrean. It cannot abandon its duty. It exists solely to carry out the will of the one it serves. Perhaps the most famous example of a shadow can be seen in the story of Rani, the witch. Rani, another Empyrean, was given a wolf companion known as Blade, a towering warrior, bound by fate to serve her. But long before Rani, there was another, Marika's shadow, a beast feared throughout the lands between, a being whose name would become synonymous with death itself. Malekith the Black Blade. Malekith was not merely a guardian. He carried something far more dangerous, something that would define the entire age of Marika's rule. Because at some point after becoming a god, Marika made a decision that would forever change the structure of reality itself. She removed death from the world. To understand this, we must remember something about the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring is composed of many runes. Each rune represents a fundamental law of existence. One of those runes governs death. This rune is known by two names: the Rune of Death and Destined Death. At some point early in her reign, Marika reached into the Elden Ring and removed this rune. She plucked it from the structure of reality itself, and she gave it to Malekith, her shadow, the Black Blade. Malekith sealed the power of destined death within his weapon, a terrible blade capable of delivering true, irreversible death. But because Malekith was bound by unbreakable loyalty, the rune remained under Marika's control. This act had enormous consequences. By removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, Marika changed how death worked in the lands between. True death, the final end of existence, no longer existed. Instead, a new cycle replaced it. When living beings died, their spirits would eventually return to the roots of the Erdtree. This is why catacombs throughout the lands between are built near the vast root systems beneath the earth. These tombs were designed so that the dead could be laid to rest close to the Erdtree, allowing their souls to be absorbed by its roots. From there, their essence would become part of the tree itself, and in this strange way, death became something closer to recycling. Spirits were not lost forever. They were gathered, remembered, and absorbed by the Erdtree. Even the powerful warriors and heroes of the world were not entirely gone when they fell. Instead, their memories lived on in the form of remembrances. fragments of their spirit, hewn into the Erdtree itself. The tree became a repository of history, a monument to those who had lived, fought, and died beneath its branches. But not all souls followed this path. Some spirits, for reasons still unknown, failed to return to the Erdtree. These lost souls lingered in the world. Their bodies decayed, their minds faded, and eventually they rose again, not as living beings, but as hollow remnants, skeletons, walking corpses, creatures trapped somewhere between life and death. These beings were known as those who live in death, and their existence would later become one of the greatest heresies in the eyes of the Golden Order. But in the early days of Marika's reign, the system worked exactly as she intended. By removing destined death, she had effectively rewritten the rules of existence. And it was in this moment that the Golden Order was truly born, because the Golden Order was not simply a religion. It was a system of laws, a cosmic structure imposed upon the world. It defined life. It defined death. It defined the way reality itself behaved. And at the center of it all stood Queen Marika, the vessel of the Elden Ring, the god of a new age. Under her rule, the lands between began to change, but the world she inherited was far from peaceful. There were ancient powers still roaming the land, enemies who would never willingly submit to the Erdtree. And if Marika wished to establish her new order, those enemies would have to be defeated. Wars would have to be fought. Kingdoms would rise. Kingdoms would fall. And to wage those wars, Marika would need someone powerful at her side. A warrior, a conqueror, a king, someone who could fight in her name, someone who would become the first Elden Lord. By the time the Golden Order was established, Queen Marika had already reshaped the laws of the world. Death had been removed from the Elden Ring. The Erdtree stood radiant above the lands between, and the Greater will finally had its vessel, its divine ruler. But even with these powers, Marika's rule was not yet secure, because the lands between were not empty. They were ancient, wild, and full of forces that had ruled long before the Erdtree ever existed. If the Golden Order was to become the dominant power of the world, those forces would have to be defeated. Marika needed an army, but more importantly, she needed a champion, a warrior powerful enough to conquer kingdoms, a leader capable of inspiring soldiers to follow him into impossible battles. And so Marika chose a man whose name had already become legend on the battlefield. His name was Horalu. Horalu was not a king. He was not a noble. He was a warrior, a brutal, unstoppable force of nature who had built his reputation through countless victories in combat. Stories described him as a man consumed by battle, someone whose strength seemed almost supernatural. But such raw power could not simply be unleashed without control. If he was to become consort to a god, he would need to change. He would need discipline, restraint, and above all, order. To achieve this, Horalu accepted a strange companion, a regal beast known as Serash. Serash was called the Beast Regent, a powerful lion spirit who would sit upon Horalu's back, not merely as decoration, but as a living symbol of restraint. Serash suppressed the warrior's overwhelming bloodlust. He tempered the savage instincts that once defined Horalu, and in doing so, he allowed the warrior to become something greater. With Serash upon his back, Horalu took on a new name, a new identity. He became Godfrey, Godfrey the first Elden Lord, consort to Queen Marika, champion of the Golden Order. Together, Marika and Godfrey would begin a series of wars that reshaped the entire world. These wars were not small conflicts between neighboring kingdoms. They were vast campaigns against ancient powers, powers that threatened the Erdtree itself. Among the most dangerous of these enemies were the fire giants. The giants were an enormous race that lived upon the towering peaks of the northern mountains. They guarded something incredibly dangerous, a terrible and ancient flame, a fire capable of burning the Erdtree. For the Golden Order, this could not be allowed, and so Godfrey marched north, leading armies beneath the golden banners of the Erdtree. The battles against the giants were brutal. Entire armies clashed upon the frozen slopes of the mountains. The giants fought with enormous strength, wielding massive weapons and the power of their terrible flame. But in the end, the Golden Order prevailed. The giants were slaughtered, their civilization shattered, and their mysterious god, known only as the fell god of the fire giants, was defeated by Marika herself. Only one giant was left alive, condemned to guard the flame for eternity. With the giants defeated, one of the greatest threats to the Erdtree had been eliminated. But the wars were far from over. Another ancient power soon challenged the rule of the Golden Order. The ancient dragons. These dragons were not the lesser drakes that roam the lands today. They were something far more terrifying. Massive, intelligent creatures whose stone scales were said to twist time itself. Some legends even suggested that their power could slay a god. At some point during the age of the Erdtree, the ancient dragons launched a massive assault on the capital. They descended upon Leyndell, the great city built beneath the Erdtree. Lightning split the skies. Stone-scaled dragons crashed against the city's towering walls. The battle that followed was legendary. Warriors of the Golden Order fought desperately to defend their capital, and eventually the dragons were driven back, though the details of this conflict are lost to time. It marked another crucial victory for Marika's growing empire. But Godfrey's greatest weapon in these wars was not simply his own strength. It was the warriors who fought at his side. Among his most loyal champions were the Crucible Knights. These knights were unlike the other soldiers of the Golden Order. Their armor was ancient, Their power even older, the Crucible Knights wielded strange abilities that drew upon the primordial crucible of life itself. They could manifest spectral wings, grow massive horns, unleash ancient forces that resembled the wild, chaotic energy of the world before the Erdtree existed. In many ways, the Crucible Knights represented a bridge between two ages, the age of the primordial crucible and the age of the Golden Order. Godfrey led 16 of these knights into battle, and together they fought in nearly every major conflict of the era, against giants, against dragons, against countless other enemies whose names have long since been forgotten. Victory after victory slowly expanded the reach of the Erdtree. Kingdoms that once stood independent were brought under the rule of Marika. Ancient powers fell, and the influence of the Golden Order spread across the lands between. Eventually, after many years of war, the conquests were complete. The enemies of the Erdtree had been defeated, and for the first time since the arrival of the Greater Will, the lands between entered a new age, the age of the Erdtree. During this time, the Erdtree was widely seen as a blessing. Its golden light bathed the land in warmth. Its branches shimmered high above the capital, and its roots spread far beneath the earth. People believed that the Erdtree protected them, guided them, and offered them a kind of immortality through its strange cycle of rebirth. One of the greatest honors a hero could receive was Erdtree burial, to be laid to rest near the roots of the sacred tree, so that one's spirit could be absorbed and remembered forever. In the capital city of Leyndell, the Erdtree towered above everything. Golden dew sometimes fell from its branches, and these drops were said to possess miraculous properties. To many people, this truly seemed like a golden age. But even during this era of triumph, the seeds of future tragedy were already being planted, because Queen Marika, the god who created this new order, was beginning to have doubts about the very system she had built, doubts about the Golden Order itself, and those doubts would eventually lead to events that shattered the world. But before that could happen, another story must unfold, a story that begins in a distant land of lakes and moonlight, a place where the Golden Order would finally meet a rival it could not easily defeat, the land of Liurnia, and the mysterious queen who ruled there. For many years, the armies of the Erdtree marched across the lands between, under the command of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Ancient enemies were defeated one after another. Giants fell, dragons retreated, kingdoms bent the knee to the Golden Order. But there was one land that refused to yield. Far to the southwest of Leyndell lay a vast region of misty lakes and quiet moonlight, a land known as Liurnia of the Lakes. Unlike many of the lands conquered by the Golden Order, Liurnia was not ruled by warriors or warlords. Instead, it was governed by scholars, astrologers, and practitioners of powerful glintstone sorcery. At the center of this magical culture stood a great academy, the Academy of Rhea Lucaria. Within its towering halls, scholars studied the mysteries of the stars and the strange blue crystals known as glintstone. They believed that magic was not merely a tool, but a path toward understanding the cosmos itself. But while the academy was a place of learning, the true ruler of Liurnia came from a noble family that traced its lineage through the moon itself, the Carian royal family. And at the head of that family stood a queen whose power rivaled the greatest champions of the Golden Order. Her name was Renala. Renala had once been a young astrologer, a scholar who studied the movements of the stars. But over time, her mastery of lunar magic grew so powerful that she rose to rule the Carian royal house. Her magic was mesmerizing, graceful, almost dreamlike. Under her leadership, the Carian knights became some of the most formidable warriors in the lands between. These knights were unlike ordinary soldiers. Each one was capable of wielding both sword and sorcery. Their enchanted weapons and magical techniques made them incredibly dangerous opponents. And though their numbers were small, fewer than 20 in total, their power was enough to rival entire armies. When the Golden Order attempted to conquer Liurnia, they quickly discovered that this land would not fall easily. The first war between the Erdtree and Liurnia erupted with tremendous force. Golden soldiers marched into the lake-covered region, but the Carian knights met them head-on. Sorceries filled the air. Glintstone projectiles flashed across the battlefield like falling stars. And despite the strength of the Golden Order, neither side was able to secure victory. Eventually, the war came to an uneasy end, but peace did not last long. A second war soon followed. Once again, the armies of the Erdtree marched toward Liurnia, and once again, the defenders of the moon held their ground. For the Golden Order, this stalemate was unusual. Nearly every other power in the lands between had eventually fallen beneath their expanding influence. But Liurnia remained independent, and at the head of the Golden Army during these wars stood a powerful champion, a warrior with flowing red hair, a man known as Raydegan. Raydegan was one of the greatest heroes of the Golden Order, a fierce fighter who commanded the respect of soldiers and nobles alike. When he first arrived in Liurnia, he came not as a diplomat, but as a conqueror. Yet something unexpected happened during these wars, because somewhere amidst the conflict, Raydegan and Renala met. Perhaps it was during battle, perhaps during negotiations, or perhaps simply through fate. But whatever the circumstances, the two champions fell in love. It was an extraordinary moment in the history of the lands between, a union between two rival powers, the golden faith of the Erdtree and the ancient lunar magic of the Carians. Raydegan abandoned his campaign. He cleansed himself of his aggression through a sacred ritual known as celestial dew, and he swore his love to Renala. Their marriage brought an end to the wars between Liurnia and the Golden Order. For a time, the wounds of battle were forgiven. The Erdtree and the moon became allies, and Rhaedagon became king consort of Liurnia. During their marriage, Rhaedagon and Renala had 3 children. Each of them would grow to become one of the most important figures in the history of the lands between. The first was Rani, a quiet and mysterious child who inherited her mother's affinity for lunar magic. From a young age, Rani showed extraordinary magical potential, but there was always something distant about her, something secretive, something that suggested her fate would not follow the same path as the other demigods. The second child was Rhaedon. Unlike his sister, Rhaedon inherited his father's immense physical strength, but he also developed a fascination with magic, specifically gravitational magic. Rhaedon studied techniques that allowed him to manipulate gravity itself. This unusual skill allowed him to perform incredible feats. Perhaps the most famous example was his decision to continue riding his beloved horse. Even as his body grew enormous with power, through gravity magic, Rhaedon could lighten his own weight, allowing the small horse to carry him effortlessly. Over time, Rhaedon became one of the most powerful warriors in the world, a towering general whose strength rivaled that of the greatest champions of the Golden Order. The third child was Rykard. Rykard followed a very different path. Rather than mastering traditional sorcery, he began experimenting with darker and more forbidden forms of magic, strange hexes, blasphemous powers, and eventually something far more horrifying. But that story belongs to another time. For many years, the marriage between Rhaedagon and Renala seemed to symbolize unity between 2 great traditions, the Golden Order and the magic of the stars. But this peace would not last, because somewhere deep within the Erdtree, Queen Marika was beginning to question everything. She had created the Golden Order. She had removed death from the world. She had conquered ancient enemies and established a new age of order. But now, she began to search for something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of her own creation. She began studying the Golden Order itself, seeking to understand its true nature, its true purpose. The days of blind faith, she believed, were over. If the Golden Order was to endure, it would need to be understood completely, and perhaps even challenged. It was around this time that Marika made another shocking decision. She banished the very champion who had helped build her empire, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. And with that single act, the next great chapter of the lands between began. Despite the victories of the Golden Order, despite the shining peace beneath the Erdtree, something within Queen Marika began to change. For years, she had ruled as the divine vessel of the Elden Ring. She had established a new order for the world. But now she began to question it. Golden Order had once been accepted with unquestioning faith. People believed in it completely. They trusted in the Erdtree, trusted in the laws that governed their lives. But Marika believed that blind faith was no longer enough. If the Golden Order was truly perfect, then it should withstand examination. It should survive scrutiny. And so Marika declared that she would search the depths of the Golden Order. She would seek to understand the truth behind the system she had created. But around this same time, another event occurred, an event that shocked the entire lands between, because the greatest champion of the Golden Order, the first Elden Lord himself, suddenly lost something very important. His grace. Grace was the golden light that guided the faithful followers of the Erdtree. It was a blessing that marked those favored by the Golden Order. And one day, the grace within Godfrey's eyes faded. The stories say that this happened after Godfrey fought his final great battle, after his last worthy enemy had fallen. Without war, without struggle, the warrior who had conquered so many lands suddenly had no purpose left. And when that moment came, the golden light abandoned him. Godfrey was no longer guided by grace. Soon after, Queen Marika made a decision that would reshape the future of the world. She banished him, not only Godfrey, but all the warriors who had fought beside him, the soldiers who had helped build the Golden Order. Marika stripped them of grace and sent them away from the lands between. She commanded them to leave and wander far beyond the reach of the Erdtree. These exiles would become known as the Tarnished. Their eyes dimmed, their connection to the Erdtree severed. They were forced to live and die in distant lands. But this exile was not meaningless. Marika had a plan. She believed that struggle was necessary for growth. She believed that hardship would make these warriors stronger. And she declared that one day, after they had lived and died, they would return to the lands between, return to claim the Elden Ring, and return to fight once again. Not long after Godfrey's exile, another great change occurred. Far away in Liurnia, the peaceful marriage between Raydegan and Renala came to an abrupt end. Without warning, Raydegan abandoned his wife. He left Liurnia and returned to the capital of the Erdtree. The reasons for this decision remain mysterious. Some say Raydegan was summoned by Marika. Others believe the Greater will itself demanded it. But whatever the cause, Raydegan left Renala behind, and the Queen of Liurnia was utterly devastated. Renala had loved Raydegan deeply, and when he departed, something within her broke. Her kingdom soon fell into chaos. The Academy of Rhea Lucaria and the Carian royal family began to clash with one another. Civil war spread throughout Liurnia, and Renala herself withdrew into isolation, clinging to memories of the love she had lost. Meanwhile, Raydegan arrived in Leyndell, and there he became the second husband of Queen Marika. The champion who once fought for the Golden Order now stood beside its goddess as the second Elden Lord. Together, Rhaedagon and Marika had two children, twin demigods whose existence would become legendary. The first was Miquella, a child of extraordinary intelligence and compassion. But Miquella was born with a terrible curse. He would never grow older, no matter how much time passed. His body remained that of a child. The second twin was Melania, a warrior destined for greatness. But she too carried a curse. Within her body lived the scarlet rot, a horrifying disease that slowly consumed everything it touched. Despite their afflictions, both twins were chosen as Empyreans, candidates who could one day inherit godhood. Yet even as these children were born, the Golden Order was already beginning to fracture, because far away, another demigod had begun making plans of her own. Rani, daughter of Rhaedagon and Rennala, the quiet child of the moon, the one who had always seemed distant, mysterious, and determined to escape the fate assigned to her. At some point during the golden age of the Erdtree, Rani committed an act that would change the world forever. She stole something from Malekith, a fragment of the Rune of Death. Remember, the Rune of Death had been sealed away by Marika and trusted to Malekith, so that true death would never again exist in the lands between. But Rani managed to obtain a small piece of that forbidden power, and on a single night she used it. This event would later be known as the Night of the Black Knives. Assassins wielding blades imbued with destined death struck across the lands between. Their target was one of the most beloved demigods of the Golden Order, Godwyn the Golden, the son of Marika and Godfrey. Godwyn was powerful, respected, admired by many. But on that terrible night, he was murdered. The assassins killed him, using the stolen fragment of the Rune of Death. And for the first time in recorded history, a demigod truly died. The consequences of this act were catastrophic, because soon after the death of her son, Queen Marika did something unimaginable. In an act of defiance, or perhaps despair, Marika shattered the Elden Ring, the divine structure that governed reality itself was broken. The great runes that formed the Elden Ring scattered across the lands between, and the demigods, children of Marika, began to fight over them, each seeking power, each seeking the throne. This conflict would become known as the Shattering, a war so devastating that it tore apart the entire world. Kingdoms collapsed, heroes fell, and the lands between descended into chaos. Meanwhile, Rhaedagon attempted to repair the Elden Ring, but it was too late. The damage had already been done, and then the truth was revealed. A secret hidden at the heart of the Golden Order. Rhaedagon and Marika were not two separate beings. They were one and the same, two aspects of a single god, two halves of a divided existence. Even now, scholars debate what this truly means. Were they always one being, or did they become one over time. The truth remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. For the crime of shattering, the Elden Ring Marika was imprisoned within the Erdtree. Yet even in chains, she remained the vessel of the Elden Ring, the god of a broken world. And far away, beyond the lands between, the tarnished who had once been exiled began to feel something stir within them. A faint golden light. Grace had returned, calling them home, calling them back to the lands between, back to the ruins of the Golden Order, back to the shattered throne. And so, the long journey of the tarnished began, a journey that would decide the fate of the Erdtree, the Elden Ring, and the entire world.